The classroom smelled wrong to most species. Too much recycled air, not enough natural scent markers, and the faint metallic tang of space station that housed 70 different alien races under one roof. Class 7B at the Galactic Youth Academy existed in a careful balance, the kind that required everyone to understand their place in the social order. At the top of that order sat Radheck, and everyone knew it. Radheck was 12 feet of apex predator, a Vornathi warrior breed whose ancestors had clawed their way to dominance on one of the most hostile planets in the known galaxy. His scales were the color of dark steel, overlapping in natural armor plates that could turn away most conventional weapons. When he moved, the class felt it through the floor. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of bass rumble that made prey species instinctively look for exits. His eyes were yellow with vertical slits, designed to track fast movement in low light. His jaw could unhinge slightly to reveal rows of serrated teeth, and if that wasn't enough, the twin venom sacs in his throat could paralyze creatures twice his size. For 2 full cycles, Radheck had ruled Class 7B without challenge. It wasn't official, of course. Professor Quilmex tried to maintain order in his own way, but even the experienced Torvin educator knew better than to push too hard. Quilmex had seen enough conflict in his 30 years of teaching to recognize when a battle wasn't worth fighting. So he taught his lessons, graded his papers, and pretended not to notice when Radheck took the best seat in the room or when smaller students diverted their paths to avoid coming too close to the predator. The Polani twins, small insectoid creatures with delicate wings and compound eyes, always arrived early to claim seats at the back. They would huddle together, their antennae twitching nervously whenever Radheck entered. The Gorvin students, stocky herbivores with thick hides and peaceful dispositions, had learned to keep their heads down and their voices quiet. Even Sela, a Muradin girl whose species was known for their boldness and sharp wit, had stopped making jokes after Radheck had fixed her with one long, predatory stare 3 months. It was simple, really. Radheck sat where he wanted. He spoke when he wanted. He took what he wanted. During lunch periods, he would walk through the cafeteria and simply reach down to take items from other students' trays. No one complained. During group projects, whichever team Radheck joined would suddenly find themselves doing most of his share of the work. No one objected. In the recreation areas, Radheck claimed the best equipment, the prime spots, the most comfortable seating. No one challenged him. This was the way of things. This was natural order, at least from Radheck's perspective. On his homeworld of Vornith Prime, the strong took what they needed and the weak learned to stay out of the way or died trying to prove otherwise. The concept of fairness was a luxury for species that didn't have to fight for every meal. Dominance wasn't cruelty in his culture, it was survival. It was honesty. It was the way the universe worked when you stripped away all the pretty words and diplomatic protocols. The other students had adapted. They created their own hierarchies below him, their own careful social structures that kept the peace. The Gorvin students allied with the Muradin students. The Polani twins formed friendships with the Telhari, another small species that valued cooperation over confrontation. They traded favors, shared resources, and most importantly, they stayed off Radheck's radar as much as possible. Professor Quilmex watched all of this with tired eyes. He was a Torvin, a species known for wisdom and patience, with gray skin that wrinkled around his eyes and a gentle way of speaking that usually puts students at ease. He had been teaching for longer than most of his students had been alive, and he had seen every kind of classroom dynamic imaginable. This one wasn't ideal, but it was stable. Stability mattered when you were trying to educate dozens of species who evolved under completely different circumstances. During lessons on galactic history, Radheck would sometimes growl low in his throat if he disagreed with something, and Quilmex would pause, acknowledge the Vornathi perspective, and move on. During science practicals, Radheck took up twice the space of any other student, and Quilmex simply rearranged the lab tables to accommodate him. During physical education, Radheck won every competition that involved strength or intimidation, and Quilmex made sure to include activities that let other students shine in their own ways. It was a delicate dance, this teaching of young aliens. Each species brought their own instincts, their own cultural baggage, their own assumptions about how the world should work. The Academy's mission was to create understanding, to build bridges between different civilizations, to prove that cooperation was possible even among species that might see each other as food or threat in the wild. Most days, Quilmex believed in that mission. Some days, he just tried to make it to the final bell without incident. On this particular day, as students filtered into the classroom for morning session, Quilmex noticed an unusual amount of chatter. The Muradin students were whispering among themselves. The Polani twins were vibrating with what looked like excitement rather than their usual fear. Even the Gorvin students seemed more animated than usual. Quilmex checked his datapad and understood immediately. They were getting a new student. That alone would be interesting. But this was more than just another alien face in a diverse classroom. This was something unprecedented. The new student was from Earth, a planet that had only recently made contact with the greater galactic community. Humans were still an unknown quantity, a species that had developed in isolation and whose culture and capabilities were mostly mysterious to the established civilizations. What they did know was troubling to some and fascinating to others. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, one of the highest danger ratings in the catalog. It was a planet of extreme weather, tectonic instability, aggressive megafauna, and microscopic organisms that could kill in dozens of creative ways. The fact that humans had not only survived but thrived on such a world made them automatic subjects of interest. Ratheck, sitting in his usual spot at the back where he could watch the entire room, showed no particular interest in the news. Another student meant nothing to him. Another body to learn its place in the hierarchy. Whether it was human or Gorvin or something else entirely made no difference. The strong rose, the weak adapted, and life continued. Professor Quilmex cleared his throat, a gesture that meant class was about to begin. Students settled into their seats, except for one that remained empty near the front. Tomorrow, that seat would be filled. Tomorrow, Class 7B would meet its first human. Tomorrow, the careful balance that had existed for 2 cycles would face its first real test. Ratheck stretched slightly, his scales clicking together like armor plates. He was completely unconcerned. After all, he had faced dozens of species in his time at the Academy. What was one more? Danny Reeves had been in space for exactly 3 weeks, and he still wasn't used to the way food tasted when it was synthesized instead of grown. Back home in Wyoming, everything came from somewhere real. The beef came from cattle his family raised. The vegetables came from the garden his mom tended. Even the water tasted like it came from actual mountain streams, because it did. Here on Station Harmony 7, everything tasted like somebody's idea of what food should taste like, programmed into a machine that had never seen a real tomato or touched actual soil. He missed home in the way that 14-year-olds miss things, which meant he thought about it constantly, but would rather die than admit out loud. He missed his dog, a German shepherd named Buck who probably thought Danny had abandoned him. He missed the sound of wind through the cottonwood trees. He missed the smell of rain on dust. He missed the way the mountains looked in the morning when the sun hit them just right. But he was here, one of the first humans selected for the Galactic Youth Academy exchange program, and his parents had been so proud when he got accepted that he couldn't bear to tell them he was homesick. The Academy corridors were wide enough to accommodate species of all sizes, which meant they felt too big to Danny. He walked through spaces designed for beings twice his height, past windows that showed the curve of the station and the stars beyond. Other students moved around him, some on legs, some on pseudopods, some floating in specialized mobility fields. He had stopped staring after the first week. Now, they were just classmates who happened to have different numbers of limbs and eyes. His quarters were small, but comfortable, designed to accommodate humanoid species with only minor adjustments. The bed was too firm, the lights were too blue, and the sonic shower felt weird compared to real water, but he was adapting. Humans were good at that, his orientation packet had said. Adaptability was supposed to be one of their strengths. Danny figured that was a nice way of saying humans came from a planet so dangerous that they had to learn to deal with anything or die, that he checked his schedule on the datapad they had issued him. Class 7B, Morning session, Professor Quilmex, room 447C. Basic galactic studies, whatever that meant. He had spent the last 3 weeks in orientation classes, learning the rules, the customs, the basics of how to not accidentally insult 70 different species. Today was his first day in a regular classroom with regular students. He was nervous, but trying not to show it. The walk to room 447C took him through 3 different sections of the station, past the hydroponics bay, where they grew real plants under artificial suns, past the recreation sphere, where students played games that made no sense to him, past the medical wing, where doctors from a dozen worlds try to understand human biology. Other students glanced at him as he passed. Some pointed. A few whispered. Humans were still new enough to be interesting, and Danny had gotten used to being stared at. He found the classroom with 5 minutes to spare. The door was open, and he could hear the sound of conversation inside, clicks and whistles, and sounds his throat couldn't make. He took a breath, adjusted the strap on his bag, and walked in. The room went quiet. Every eye, and there were a lot of eyes and configurations he was still getting used to, turned to look at him. Professor Quilmex, a gray-skinned being with kind eyes and a patient expression, gestured to an empty seat near the front. Danny smiled, a gesture he had been told was considered friendly by most species, even if some of them found it confusing. He walked to the seat, aware of the weight of attention on him. The chair adjusted automatically to his height, and he set his bag down beside him. He could feel the stares, hear the whispers starting up again. He kept his expression calm and friendly, the same way he did when meeting new people back home. Then he felt it, a presence at his back, large and radiating heat. He turned and looked up and up and up. The being standing behind him was massive, 12 feet at least, covered in dark scales that looked like natural armor. Yellow eyes with vertical slits stared down at him with an intensity that would have made most creatures flinch. The jaw had too many teeth, and Danny could see the slight bulge in the throat that suggested venom sacs. Claws, currently retracted but visible in the fingertips, completed the picture. This was a predator, pure and simple, the kind of creature that sat at the top of the food chain and knew it. Rat Heck leaned down, bringing his head closer to Danny's level. His breath smelled like meat and something sharper, maybe the venom. He was displaying, making himself look bigger, using his size and presence to establish dominance. Danny recognized the behavior. He had seen it in bulls, in stallions, in the mountain lions that sometimes came down from the high country. This was the universal language of predators claiming territory. The room was completely silent now. Every student was watching. Professor Quilmex had paused in the middle of organizing his materials. This was clearly a test, the kind of moment that would define Danny's place in the social order. Everyone was waiting to see what the human would do. Would he show fear? Would he submit? Would he try to fight? What did humans do when confronted by something bigger and more dangerous? Danny looked up at Radheck and felt no fear. He had grown up on a ranch where things went wrong regularly. He had helped pull calves during difficult births. He had dealt with rattlesnakes in the barn and coyotes in the pasture. He had been kicked by horses, butted by goats, and once chased by a bull that had gotten loose. His dad had taught him that showing fear to an aggressive animal was the fastest way to get hurt. You stayed calm, you stood your ground, and you let them know you weren't prey. Danny did what came naturally. He met Radheck's eyes directly, which seemed to surprise the big predator. Then he spoke, his voice calm and just a little bit annoyed. "Hey buddy, you're blocking my light." Not a challenge, not submission, just a simple statement of fact, delivered the way he would to anyone standing in his way. No fear sent, because humans didn't broadcast fear through pheromones the way many species did. No cowering or averting eyes, because that wasn't how Danny was raised. Just a kid asking another kid to move so he could see the board at Radheck's eyes widened slightly. This wasn't the response he was used to. Other students backed down immediately, showed submission, made themselves smaller. This human just looked mildly inconvenienced, like Radheck was blocking his view of something important rather than being a towering predator capable of tearing him apart. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Then Ratheck straightened up and moved back to his seat at the rear of the classroom. He said nothing, but his tail swished once in agitation. The other students stared at Danny with something like shock. The Polani twins were vibrating so hard their wings hummed. The Muradin students had their mouths hanging open. Even Professor Quilmex looked surprised, though he recovered quickly and began the lesson. Danny pulled out his datapad and got ready to take notes. His heart was beating faster than normal, but his hands were steady. First day in a new school, and he had already made an impression. He wasn't sure if it was a good one or a bad one, but at least it was memorable. Back home, his dad always said that respect was earned by knowing when to stand your ground. Danny figured that applied in space just as much as it did in Wyoming. Ratheck sat in his usual seat, staring at the back of the human's head. His mind was working through what had just happened. No fear, no submission, just calm confidence, as if Danny had dealt with creatures like him before and found them unremarkable. It was confusing. It was irritating. It was interesting. This human was going to be a problem. Ratheck just wasn't sure what kind of problem yet. 3 days of watching the human had taught Ratheck nothing useful. Danny Reeves moved through the academy like someone who had already decided he belonged there, without the careful deference most students showed to larger or more dangerous species. He ate lunch with whoever invited him. He asked questions in class that showed he was actually paying attention. He laughed at jokes, even when they were told by species whose humor was completely different from human comedy. He was friendly without being weak, confident without being aggressive, and completely, utterly unafraid of Wraith KIT was driving the Vornathi warrior insane. Ratheck had tried the usual methods. On the second day, he had walked past Danny's desk and casually knocked his datapad to the floor. Most students would have frozen, recognized the challenge, and carefully retrieved their property while showing proper submission. Danny had just picked it up, checked it for damage, and gone back to his work without even looking at Ratheck. No anger, no fear, just mild inconvenience that on the third day, during lunch, Ratheck had taken a piece of fruit from Danny's tray. It was a classic dominance move, something he had done 100 times before. The proper response was to let him have it and accept the social order. Danny had watched him take it, shrugged, and eaten something else from his tray. Then he had offered Ratheck another piece. "You want this too? I'm not that hungry anyway." The words were friendly, but they completely missed the point. Or maybe they didn't miss the point at all, which was worse. During group work, Ratheck had deliberately chosen Danny's team. Usually this meant the other students would do extra work to compensate for Ratheck's lack of effort. Danny had simply divided the work equally, assigned Ratheck a section, and then checked in with him regularly to see if he needed help. Not in a challenging way, not in a fearful way, just in the way someone would help a teammate. It was infuriating. The other students noticed. The Polani twins had started sitting closer to Danny, their fear of Ratheck's proximity apparently less than their curiosity about the human who didn't act like prey. Sela, the Muradin girl, had actually made a joke during lunch about Ratheck's scales looking shiny, something she hadn't dared to do in months. The careful social order that Ratheck had maintained was developing cracks, and it all came back to this small human who didn't understand his place. The breaking point came during physical education. The Academy's gymnasium was a massive space with adjustable gravity and environmental controls to accommodate different species. Today they were doing zero-gravity combat training, a class designed to teach students how to maneuver and defend themselves in space environments. Professor Rylan, a Telhari instructor with 4 arms and an extensive military background, supervised as students practiced in pairs. Ratheck had no partner. Nobody wanted to train with him because nobody wanted to get hurt. He was too strong, too fast, too dangerous. Usually he practiced forms alone while other students worked together. Today, Danny approached him. "Want to partner up?" The human asked, strapping on protective padding. Ratheck looked down at him. This was an opportunity. In zero gravity, size mattered less, but experience and predatory instinct mattered more. He could show this human exactly where he stood in the natural order. He could do it officially, with Professor Rylan watching, under the guise of training. No rules broken, just a clear demonstration of reality. "Yes," Ratheck said, showing his teeth in what wasn't quite a smile. They moved to the center of the training area where the gravity generators created a spherical zone of weightlessness. Other students formed a loose circle around them, some floating, some using magnetic boots to stay anchored to the walls. Everyone wanted to see this. The apex predator versus the mysterious human from the death world. Professor Ryland explained the rules. This was practice combat, focused on control and technique. Full contact was allowed, but participants were expected to show restraint. Injuries were to be avoided. The exercise was meant to teach, not to harm. Ratheck barely listened. He knew what he was going to do. The gravity cut out, and they were floating. Ratheck immediately used his superior mass and strength to launch himself at Danny. Claws retracted, but using his full speed and momentum. He planned to grab the human, slam him into the padded wall hard enough to wind him, and establish once and for all that Ratheck was the dominant force in Class 7. Danny didn't dodge. That was the first surprise. Most opponents tried to avoid Ratheck's charges. Instead, the human rotated slightly, dropped his shoulder, and used Ratheck's own momentum against him. It was a simple redirect, the kind of move that took advantage of physics rather than strength. Suddenly, Ratheck was spinning, his trajectory altered, his control gone. He hit the padding at an angle, the impact jarring even through his natural armor. He recovered quickly, pushing off the wall to face Danny again. The human was floating calmly, not in a defensive posture, but not aggressive either. Just waiting, just watching. Ratheck growled low in his throat and charged again, this time ready for tricks. Danny met him with the same calm efficiency. He didn't try to overpower Ratheck. Instead, he used leverage, rotation, and timing. Every one of Ratheck's advantages in size and strength became a disadvantage when Danny redirected that force elsewhere. They tumbled through the zero-gravity space, Ratheck growing more frustrated with each failed attack, Danny growing more confident with each successful defense. Finally, Ratheck managed to grab Danny's arm. He had him now. He could pull the human close, demonstrate his dominance physically in this embarrassing display. He yanked hard, pulling Danny toward him. Danny came willingly, using the momentum to get inside Ratheck's guard. Then he did something that shocked everyone watching. He locked his legs around Ratheck's midsection and his arms around the Vornathi's neck. Not choking, not trying to harm, just holding on with absolute determination. In gravity, Ratheck could have thrown him off easily. In zero gravity, Danny's mass and position made him nearly impossible to dislodge without hurting him. They spun slowly through the space, Ratheck trying to pry the human off, Danny holding on with a grip that suggested he had no intention of letting go until Ratheck calmed down. It wasn't a winning position exactly, but it wasn't a losing one either. It was a stalemate, and more importantly, it was a statement. Danny couldn't overpower Ratheck, but Ratheck couldn't make Danny submit either. Professor Ryland called time. The gravity returned gradually, lowering them both to the floor. Danny released his grip and floated back, breathing hard but smiling. He extended his hand toward Ratheck, and what the human had explained was a gesture of respect and sportsmanship. "Good match," Danny said, not mocking, not afraid, just genuine. Ratheck stared at the extended hand. In Vornathi culture, this moment would normally end with the weaker party showing submission, acknowledging their place. But Danny wasn't submitting. He was offering something else entirely. Respect between equals. Partnership instead of hierarchy. The human way, apparently. The other students watched in complete silence. This was unprecedented. Nobody challenged Ratheck and then offered friendship. Nobody treated him like an equal rather than a threat. But Danny was doing exactly that, standing there with his hand out, waiting for Ratheck to make a choice. Ratheck looked at that hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and grasped it. The human's grip was firm, confident, lacking the tremor of fear or the excessive pressure of someone trying to prove something. Just a handshake between two people who had tested each other and found something worth respecting. "Good match," Ratheck echoed, the words feeling strange in his mouth. As they moved apart and other students began their exercises, Ratheck felt something unfamiliar. Not the satisfaction of dominance, but something else. Curiosity, interest, the beginning of respect. This human was like the creatures his grandfather had told stories about, the kind that were small but refused to acknowledge they were outmatched. On Vornith Prime, they called such creatures foolhardy. In human terms, they had another name. Danny had mentioned it once in conversation with another student, something about an earth animal. A honey badger. Small, fearless, refusing to be intimidated no matter the size of the threat. Rat watched Danny return to his friends, laughing about something, already moving past the confrontation. The human had faced down an apex predator, used intelligence instead of strength, and walked away acting like it was just another day. Like dealing with dangerous things was normal for him. Like fear was optional. For the first time in 2 cycles, Rat felt something other than assured dominance. He felt challenged, not physically but mentally. This human was teaching him something, whether Danny knew it or not. The question was whether Rat was willing to learn. Rat spent the evening after the training session doing something he rarely did: research. His quarters were sparse by most standards, decorated in the minimal Vornathi style that emphasized function over comfort. He sat at his workstation, his large frame making the furniture look smaller than it was, and accessed the Academy's database. The search term was simple: Earth. The first thing that came up was the planetary classification. Class 12 Death World. Rat knew the classification system well enough. His own homeworld of Vornith Prime was a Class 9, considered extremely dangerous by most civilized species. Earth was 3 levels higher. He read through the details with growing disbelief. Earth experienced regular seismic events that could level cities. Its atmosphere created storms with winds that could tear apart structures. The planet's rotation created something called hurricanes, massive weather systems that could span hundreds of miles and last for weeks. The oceans contained creatures that grew larger than many spacecraft, predators with teeth the size of Rat arm. The land supported megafauna that humans had hunted to extinction or learned to domesticate. Microscopic organisms existed that could kill in days, sometimes hours. Then there were the plants. Rat learned that Earth plants could be poisonous, carnivorous, or covered in thorns that delivered venom. The database showed images of something called a Venus flytrap and another thing called a pitcher plant. Even the vegetation on Earth was dangerous, but humans had survived all of it. More than survived, they had thrived. They had spread across every continent, adapted to every environment from frozen tundra to burning deserts. They had learned to predict the weather, build structures that could withstand earthquakes, develop medicine to fight diseases. They had taken a planet that should have killed them and made it home. Rat pulled up videos from Earth, footage that human ambassadors had shared with the galactic community. He watched humans doing something called mountain climbing, scaling vertical rock faces with minimal equipment, their bodies adapted for endurance rather than raw strength. He watched surfers riding waves that could easily kill them, treating it as recreation. He watched rescue workers running into burning buildings to save others, toward danger rather than away from it. Then he found videos of human-animal interactions. A man calmly relocating a rattlesnake from his property, speaking to it in a soothing voice. A woman hand-feeding a grizzly bear, something that should have resulted in her death, but instead showed years of careful trust-building. A child helping hatch baby sea turtles, guiding them to the ocean past predators that waited on the beach. One video in particular caught his attention. It showed a small animal attacking a creature 10 times its size. The description called it a honey badger. The animal was fearless, absolutely refusing to back down despite being massively outmatched. It fought with determination and intelligence, using every advantage it had. The video explained that honey badgers were known for their aggressive nature and their refusal to be intimidated by anything, even apex predators. The human who narrated the video spoke with obvious admiration and amusement. This was the kind of creature humans respected. Not the biggest or strongest, but the one that never gave up, never showed fear, never accepted that size determined outcome. Rat watched the video 3 times, seeing Danny's behavior reflected in the small animal's actions, that he searched for more information on human psychology and culture. What he found challenged everything he thought he understood about predator species. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters, creatures that didn't rely on speed or strength, but on endurance and intelligence. They would chase prey for hours, sometimes days, until the target collapsed from exhaustion. They worked in groups, communicated complex strategies, and used tools to compensate for their physical limitations. But what really stood out was their relationship with other species. Humans had domesticated dozens of animals, forming partnerships rather than just dominant hierarchies. Dogs, descended from wolves, now worked alongside humans as equals. Horses, powerful enough to kill a human with one kick, allowed themselves to be ridden. Even cats, independent predators in their own right, chose to live with humans in mutual cooperation. The concept was alien to Vornathi culture. On Vornath Prime, you were predator or prey, strong or weak, dominant or submissive. There was no middle ground, no partnership between species of different strengths. Yet humans had built their entire civilization on exactly that concept. They saw value in cooperation even with creatures that could harm them. They believed in earning respect rather than taking it by force. Radhek leaned back in his chair, processing this information. Danny's behavior made sense now. The human wasn't being foolish or ignorant. He was being human. Fear wasn't absent in Danny, it was just processed differently. Humans felt fear, but chose to act anyway. They assessed threats logically rather than instinctively. They believed that intelligence and determination could overcome physical disadvantages. The door chime interrupted his thoughts. Radhek wasn't expecting visitors. He opened the door and found Danny standing there, looking small in the corridor designed for beings of all sizes. "Hey," Danny said casually. "Professor Quilmax assigned us as partners for the upcoming project. Figure we should talk about it." Radhek stepped aside, allowing Danny to enter. The human walked in without hesitation, showing the same lack of fear he displayed everywhere else. He looked around the sparse quarters with interest, but no judgment. "Your room is neat," Danny commented. "Mine is a mess. I keep meaning to organize, but I never get around to it." They sat down, Radhek in his chair, Danny on the edge of the sleeping platform, since there was no other furniture size for someone's height. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Radhek decided to ask the question that had been bothering him since their first meeting. "Why do you not fear me?" Danny looked surprised by the direct question, then thoughtful. He took his time answering, which Radhek was learning was a human trait. They considered their words before speaking. "I do fear you," Danny said finally. "You're bigger, stronger, and you've got natural weapons I can't compete with. But fear and respect are different things. Back home, we've got mountain lions, bears, rattlesnakes, all kinds of creatures that can kill you. You learn pretty quick that showing fear just makes you prey. You stay calm, you show respect, and usually the predator decides you're not worth the trouble." He shifted his position, getting comfortable. "My dad taught me that most predators don't actually want to fight. Fighting risks injury, and injury can mean death in the wild. Predators want easy prey, something that runs or acts scared. If you stand your ground, if you make it clear you're not easy prey, most of the time they'll back off." "But I'm not most predators," Radhek said. "I could harm you easily." "Sure," Danny agreed. "You could, but you haven't. Because we're not on a hunting ground. We're in a school. The rules are different here. You know that, even if you've been acting like they don't apply to you." The words should have been offensive, but Danny's tone was matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. He was stating an observation, not making a challenge. "On your world, strength is everything," Danny continued. "I get that. On my world, we've got a saying, work smarter, not harder. Humans aren't the biggest or strongest or fastest. We're not even close. But we learn to cooperate, to use tools, to think our way through problems. We survive by being adaptable, not dominant." Radhek considered this. "You are saying I should adapt." "I'm saying we're not on our homeworlds anymore," Danny replied. "We're here with dozens of other species, all trying to figure out how to coexist. Maybe the strength-based hierarchy works on Vornath Prime. But here, there's always going to be someone stronger, someone more dangerous, someone with better natural weapons. You can't dominate everyone, so maybe you try something else. Like what? Danny smiled. Like being someone people want to work with instead of someone they're afraid of. Like earning respect instead of taking it. Like using that strength of yours to help instead of intimidate. They talked for another hour, discussing the project, but also ranging into broader topics. Danny told stories about growing up on a ranch, dealing with livestock and wildlife, learning to read animal behavior. Radheck shared carefully edited versions of life on Vornith Prime, the constant competition, the drive to prove oneself worthy. When Danny finally left, Radheck sat alone in his quarters, thinking about everything they had discussed. The human had challenged his fundamental assumptions about how the world worked, not through force, but through logic and lived experience. It was uncomfortable, having his beliefs questioned, but it was also interesting. Radheck accessed the database again, this time searching for information on cooperation and teamwork. If he was going to try the human way, he needed to understand it better. The honey badger might be fearless, but it was also smart enough to know when to fight and when to find another solution. Maybe there was something to learn from that. The change in Class 7B happened gradually, like ice melting under a sun that nobody had noticed was rising. It started small. Radheck arrived for morning session, and instead of taking his usual seat at the back where he could watch everyone, he sat closer to the middle. Not quite integrated with the other students, but not deliberately separate either. The Polani twins noticed first, their antennae twitching in confusion. Then Sela noticed, her eyes widening. Word spread through the class in whispers and glances. Danny arrived a few minutes later, dumped his bag next to his usual seat, and waved at Radheck like it was the most normal thing in the world. Radheck raised one clawed hand in what might have been an attempt at waving back. It looked awkward on a 12-foot predator, but he tried. Over the next week, students watched with fascination as the impossible happened. Radheck and Danny worked together on their assigned project, something about the economic impact of the trade routes in the Outer Rim. They met in the library, spread out data pads and reference materials, and actually collaborated. Radheck contributed research on resource extraction from his home system. Danny added information about human trade partnerships and negotiation strategies. They argued sometimes, but it was the kind of argument where both people were trying to find the right answer rather than trying to dominate the conversation. The most shocking moment came during lunch on the 5th day. Danny sat at his usual table with a mixed group of students, the Polani twins, a Gorvin student named Brell, and Sela. They were discussing the project and laughing about Professor Quilmex's tendency to go off on tangents about ancient history. Radheck approached with his tray, and the table went silent. "May I sit here?" Radheck asked, the words clearly uncomfortable in his mouth. Danny looked up and grinned. "Sure, plenty of room." The others stared in shock as Radheck carefully settled his bulk onto a reinforced bench designed for larger species. He had never asked permission before. He had never sat with a group voluntarily. He had certainly never looked uncertain about whether he was welcome. The conversation restarted awkwardly, everyone hyper-aware of the apex predator eating lunch with them. But Danny just kept talking like nothing had changed, asking Radheck his opinion on things, including him naturally in the discussion. After about 10 minutes, the others started to relax. Radheck wasn't performing dominance displays. He wasn't taking food from their trays. He was just eating lunch and listening, occasionally adding something to the conversation in his deep, rumbling voice. Sela, who had spent months avoiding eye contact with Radheck, made a joke about the cafeteria food. "I swear they're trying to poison us. This is supposed to taste like Muradin spice grain, but it tastes like recycled cardboard." There was a moment of silence where everyone held their breath. Then Radheck made a sound that might have been a laugh. "The Vornathi meat rations taste like preserved fuel cells. I think they use the same machine for everything and just change the settings." The table erupted in laughter, partially at the joke, and partially from relief that Radheck had actually participated in humor instead of being offended. The ice broke completely after that. Students started sharing complaints about their species-specific food, comparing which was worse, laughing at the universal truth that cafeteria food was terrible no matter what galaxy you came from. The friendship between Danny and Radheck deepened through shared study sessions. They met most evenings in the library or one of the common areas, working on projects, but also just talking. Danny told Rat Heck about Earth, about the ranch where he grew up, about the concept of working animals, and how humans had formed partnerships with creatures that could have been threats. He showed Rat Heck videos of cattle drives, sheepdogs herding flocks, horses and riders moving as one unit. Rat Heck shared stories of Vornith Prime that he had never told anyone at the Academy. He talked about the constant competition among young Vornathi, the coming-of-age hunts, the pride of proving yourself worthy. But he also, hesitantly, talked about the pressure of that culture, the loneliness of always having to be the strongest, the exhaustion of never being able to show weakness. On my world, friendship is rare, Rat Heck admitted one evening. They were in one of the observation lounges, looking out at the stars. Alliances exist, temporary partnerships for specific goals. But true friendship, where you trust someone not to use your weakness against you, that is almost unknown. Danny nodded thoughtfully. That sounds exhausting, having to be on guard all the time. It is, Rat Heck said quietly. I did not realize how much until I came here. At first, I thought the other species were weak because they cooperated instead of competed. Now I wonder if perhaps they understood something we did not. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Danny spoke up. You know what's funny? Before I came to space, I thought predators and prey were simple concepts. Predators hunt, prey runs, that's nature. But here I've got friends who are prey species by evolution, and they're some of the smartest, bravest people I know. And you're a predator by evolution, but you're learning to be something more than that. What am I learning to be? Rat Heck asked. A person, Danny said simply. Not just a predator or a warrior or a dominant force. A person who can choose how they interact with others. The change in Rat Heck affected the entire class dynamic. Other students started sitting closer to him, not out of fear, but curiosity. The Gorvin student, Brell, asked Rat Heck for help with a physical education challenge, knowing that the Vornathi's strength and experience could be valuable. Rat Heck, instead of seeing it as an opportunity to demonstrate dominance, actually taught Brell some techniques for using leverage to compensate for limited strength. The Polani twins, the ones who used a hide when Rat Heck entered the room, approached him one day with a technical problem. Their species specialized in complex machinery, but they needed someone strong enough to move a heavy piece of equipment for a project. Rat Heck helped them, carefully using his strength exactly as needed, listening to their precise instructions about placement and angle. Sela started making jokes around Rat Heck, testing to see if he could handle humor directed at him. He could mostly. Sometimes he didn't understand the joke and had to ask for explanation, which led to conversations about cultural differences in comedy. Sometimes he actually made jokes back, dry observations about academy life that showed he had been paying more attention to social dynamics than anyone realized. Professor Quilmex watched all of this with quiet satisfaction. He had been teaching long enough to know that real change in a classroom didn't come from rules or lectures. It came from students learning from each other, seeing each other as people rather than representatives of their species. Danny had been the catalyst, but Rat Heck had done the actual work of changing. That took courage, especially for someone whose entire culture was built around never showing weakness or admitting error. One evening, after a particularly successful study session where half the class had gathered to work on a group presentation, Danny and Rat Heck walked back to their quarters together. The corridors were quiet, most students already asleep or in their rooms. Thank you, Rat Heck said suddenly. Danny looked up at him surprised. For what? For not treating me like a monster. For seeing that I could be more than what I was. Danny was quiet for a moment, then smiled. You were never a monster, Rat Heck. You were just doing what you thought you were supposed to do. All I did was show you that there were other options. Still, Rat Heck insisted. You gave me something I did not have on Vornith Prime. A friend. Danny bumped his shoulder against Rat Heck's leg, the highest point he could comfortably reach. Yeah, well, you're not so bad yourself. For a 12-foot predator with venom sacs and retractable claws. Rat Heck's rumbling laugh echoed through the corridor. They continued walking, an unlikely pair who had somehow found common ground. The human from the death world who refused to act like prey, and the Predator, who learned that strength could be used for more than dominance. Together, they had changed Class 7B from a hierarchy based on fear to a community based on respect. But the real test of that community was coming, though neither of them knew it yet. Station Harmony 7 was about to face a crisis that would require every student in Class 7B to work together, combining their unique abilities and newly formed bonds. The friendship between Danny and Radheck had laid the foundation. Now they would discover if the structure they had built could withstand real pressure. The alarm that tore through Station Harmony 7 at 0300 hours was the kind nobody wanted to hear. Not the soft chime of a drill, not the measured tone of a scheduled maintenance alert, but the sharp, urgent wail that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. Danny jolted awake in his quarters, his heart already racing before his mind fully caught up. The emergency lighting cast red shadows across his room as the station's automated announcement played through the speakers. Containment breach in Xenobiology Research Lab 7. All personnel evacuate affected sections. Security teams respond. Students shelter in place. Repeat, students shelter in place. Danny grabbed his datapad, pulling up the station map. Lab 7 was in the research wing, 3 sections away from the residential areas. The affected sections included primary corridors and several auxiliary spaces. He checked the student housing layout and felt his stomach drop. The path the creature would most likely take, if it was following the station's air circulation and heat signatures, would lead it directly toward the junior student quarters. Kids aged 6 to 10, dozens of them, from species that had no natural defenses against an aggressive predator. His datapad chimed. A message from Radheck. You see the map? Danny typed back. Yeah. Someone needs to slow it down before it reaches the junior quarters. Agreed. Meet me at Junction 7C in 5 minutes. Danny should have stayed in his room. The announcement had been clear. Shelter in place meant exactly that. But he thought about those junior students, some of them barely old enough to be away from their families, facing something dangerous while security tried to respond from the other side of the station. 5 minutes could mean the difference between scared kids and dead kids. He pulled on his clothes, grabbed a maintenance tool from his desk, and headed for the door. The corridors were chaos. Emergency protocols had sealed some sections, forcing everyone into specific routes. Students peered out of doorways, confused and frightened. Danny moved against the flow of people evacuating, drawing stares and a few shouts telling him he was going the wrong way. He ignored them. Junction 7C was a major intersection where 3 corridors met. Radheck was already there, looking even larger than usual in the red emergency lighting. He wasn't alone. Sela stood beside him, her small frame tense but determined. The Polani twins hovered nearby, their wings humming with nervous energy. Brel was there too, the Gorvin student whose thick hide might actually be useful in a fight. What are you all doing here? Danny asked, though he already knew the answer. Same as you, Sela said. Those are kids down there, little ones who don't know what's happening. One of the Polani twins, Danny thought her name was Nika, spoke in the clicking language of her people. Her translator rendered it as, "We have technical skills, can help with doors systems." Her brother added, "Security is coming from main hub. Will take 12 minutes minimum." Too long. Radheck looked at Danny. I accessed the research logs. The creature is a ravager from Quarantine World 447. Extremely aggressive, heavy armor plating, hunting instinct triggered by movement and fear responses. So we can't run from it, Danny said, his mind already working through the problem. And we probably can't fight it directly. No, Radheck agreed. But we can slow it down. Channel it away from the junior quarters. Make it focus on us instead of them. It was a terrible plan. It was also the only plan they had. Danny pulled up the station map on his datapad, studying the layout. Okay, here's what we do. We don't try to fight this thing. We frustrate it. Tire it out. Make it chase us through sections where we control the environment. The Polani twins can work the door controls, seal off routes, force it where we want it to go. Burrell stepped forward. My species is thick skin. I can take a hit better than most. I'll draw its attention when needed. Sela pulled out a small device from her pocket. Sonic emitter. Muradins used them for pest control, might disorient it temporarily. They worked quickly, forming a plan that used each person's strengths. Radhek would be the primary physical presence, his size and predator instincts letting him face the creature without freezing. Danny would coordinate, his human ability to think tactically under pressure, making him the natural strategist. The others would support, using their unique abilities to control the battlefield. The Ravager appeared 6 minutes later. It was massive, 8 feet tall at the shoulder, covered in overlapping plates of natural armor that looked like dark metal. 6 legs, each ending in claws that sparked against the deck plating. A head that was mostly jaw, filled with teeth designed to crunch through bone and shell. Its eyes were small and red, focused with single-minded intensity on hunting. The IT saw them and charged. Now, Danny shouted. Burrell stepped into its path, his thick hide absorbing the initial impact as the Ravager slammed into him. He went down but rolled aside, avoiding the snapping jaws. Ratheck roared, a sound that echoed through the corridor and triggered the Ravager's challenge response. The creature turned toward this new threat, something big enough to be worth fighting. The Polani twins worked the door controls, sealing off the route to the junior quarters and opening a path toward the cargo sections. Sela activated her sonic emitter, creating a high-pitched frequency that made the Ravager shake its head in confusion. Danny directed traffic, keeping everyone moving, using his datapad to track the creature's position and find the next bottleneck. They led it through 3 sections, using every trick they could think of. Ratheck would challenge it directly, then retreat before it could close to killing range. Brell would dart in from the side, his dense body taking hits that would have killed anyone else. Sela used her sonic emitter in bursts, disrupting the creature's hunting pattern. The Polani twins controlled every door, every light, every environmental system they could access. Danny coordinated it all, his mind working like he was herding cattle back home. You didn't fight an angry bull head-on. You made it go where you wanted through pressure and patience. The Ravager was just another aggressive animal, and animals were predictable once you understood their instincts. They funneled it into a cargo bay with reinforced walls and a single entrance. The moment the creature was inside, the Polani twins sealed the door. The Ravager slammed against it, making the entire section shake, but the door held. Security arrived 2 minutes later, properly equipped with stun weapons designed for hostile fauna. They found Class 7B students sitting in the corridor outside the cargo bay, exhausted and battered but alive. Brell had some nasty bruises. Ratheck had a gash across his arm where the Ravager's claws had connected. Sela's sonic emitter was cracked and sparking. The Polani twins were physically fine, but mentally exhausted from controlling so many systems simultaneously. Danny had a split lip from where he'd been thrown against a wall during one close call, but he was grinning. Students, what were you thinking? The security chief, a Torvin named Gree, demanded. You were ordered to shelter in place. We were thinking about the junior students, Ratheck said calmly. Creature was heading toward their quarters. We bought you time to get here. Gree looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the grounds. They had technically violated orders, but they had also saved lives. He settled for, you're all going to medical. Then we're having a serious discussion about following protocols. In the medical bay, while a doctor treated his various minor injuries, Danny sat next to Ratheck. The Vornathi was getting his arm sealed, the gash already closing under the synthetic skin treatment. That was insane, Danny said. Yes, Ratheck agreed. Also necessary. We could have died. Yes, but we did not. Because we worked together. Used each person's strength. Covered each other's weaknesses. Ratheck looked at Danny with his yellow eyes. This is what you meant, is it not? About cooperation being stronger than domination. Danny nodded, then winced as the doctor dabbed something on his split lip. Yeah, none of us could have done that alone. But together, we were strong enough. The story spread through the academy within hours. Class 7B, led by the human and the Vornathi who used to rule through fear, had faced down a quarantine world predator and won through teamwork and strategy. Other students looked at them differently now, not with fear or intimidation, but with respect. In the cafeteria the next day, Their usual table couldn't hold everyone who wanted to sit with them. Students from other classes asked to hear the story. Some wanted advice on their own class dynamics. Others just wanted to be near the group that had proven cooperation could work even in the most dangerous situations. Professor Quilmex pulled Danny and Radheck aside after class. "What you did was dangerous and technically against regulations," he said sternly. Then his expression softened. "It was also brave, smart, and exactly the kind of thinking we try to teach here. You understood that your differences made you stronger together. That is the lesson most students take years to learn, if they learn it at all." Danny and Radheck walked back to their quarters together that evening, falling into the comfortable rhythm they had developed over the past weeks. The station had returned to normal operations. The Ravager was secure. The junior students were safe. Life continued. "You know," Danny said thoughtfully, "when I first got here, I was just trying to not embarrass humans. Make a good impression, show that we could fit in with all these alien species. And now," Radheck asked, "now, I think maybe the best impression isn't about fitting in. It's about being yourself and finding the people who appreciate that." He looked up at his friend. "Like a honey badger. Small, not the strongest, but absolutely refusing to back down when something matters." Radheck's rumbling laugh echoed through the corridor. "Honey badgers are solitary creatures," you said. "But you also said humans are better in packs." "True," Danny admitted. "So maybe I'm a honey badger who learned to run with wolves." "I'm not a wolf," Radheck pointed out. "Close enough. You're definitely an apex predator who learned there's more to life than being scary." They reached the junction where their corridors split, going to different residential sections. They stopped, as they did every evening, neither quite ready to end the conversation. "Thank you, Danny," Radheck said quietly, "for teaching me that strength can be used for more than dominance. For showing me what friendship means." "Thank you for being willing to learn," Danny replied. "And for being someone worth knowing once you stop trying so hard to be feared." They parted ways, each heading to their quarters. Behind them, they left a changed classroom, a group of students who had learned to see past species differences and work together. The 12-foot predator no longer ruled through fear. The human kid had unleashed his inner honey badger and shown everyone that determination and fearlessness came in all sizes. Together, they had created something better than dominance or submission. They had created community. And in a galaxy of countless species, each trying to find their place among the stars, that was worth more than any display of individual strength could ever be.